Berlin court orders Senate to release suspects' first names after the Alternative für Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany, legal win. The AfD is a right-wing party in Germany. They are labeled as far-right in an attempt to smear them. And they are hated on by both the traditional right-wing party and the left because they have two major platforms that they stand on. They are anti-mass immigration, particularly the Islamic kind in their country, because they recognize the massive increase in violence that have occurred since this has happened. And they also don't like the Green Deals, the restrictions on fuel and gas and nuclear power. So they are disliked. Back in 2015, 2016, the German government had just brought in a few million Arabs. And that year, that same year, on New Year's Eve, 1,200 women were either, raped or were sexually assaulted or robbed or both throughout Germany. And a huge part of them were done in the city of Cologne. Yeah, right here. This was massive. When you're bringing in people who are not used to Western civilization, the niceties that we are accustomed to, it's difficult to get them to assimilate to your culture, and especially when you bring them in by the millions. Germany, by importing so many all at once, had a massive spike in crime. So the German government then began to implement a new policy. They no longer would release the names, so you wouldn't know. You couldn't guess which nationality was responsible for the murders. Pretty tricky, right? So this new court order, Berlin's state government will now have to release the first names of knife attackers, revealing the true cost of mass immigration in the German capital. It is funny how this is happening all over Western democracies. I think all Western civilization is currently at risk right now, because we have imported too many people who do not have Western sensibilities. You can bring people in from other countries who don't have the same sensibilities, and over time they'll assimilate to your culture, assimilate to your society. But if you bring too many in at once, they may eventually try to overtake your society. This is how the Roman Empire collapsed. Let's see. The Berlin Constitutional Court has ruled that the Senate must disclose the most common first names of suspects in knife attacks, siding with the right-wing Alternative für Deutschland or Germany in a politically charged dispute over crime data transparency. They have been hiding this data for years because they knew that the massive spike in crime was coming from non-German citizens, and they were trying to protect their mass immigration program. The ruling announced on Monday forces the Berlin Senate to provide the AfD parliamentary group in the House of Representatives with a list of the 20 most common first names among German citizens suspected of knife-related crimes. So not only are they hiding this from the public, but they were trying to hide it from a political party. This comes after the Senate had previously refused to comply with a request made by AfD lawmaker Marc Vallendar in May of 2024, citing concerns over personal data protection. It was over trying to protect yourselves from a political backlash in finding out that minority groups had a huge hand in the killings and stabbings. Now, according to the court, while naming suspects involves an intrusion into personal data, there is no convincing evidence that it poses a real identification risk to specific individuals, which, by the way, Germany is not the U.S., obviously. But I think if you commit a crime, I think your right to privacy, especially if you've been convicted, I think you don't get a right to privacy. Personally, that's what I think. Now, considering we live in a social media world where cancellations are the word of the day, I do think that accusations that you haven't been convicted for probably shouldn't be public knowledge, because it's used too often to bury people. I mean, look at the Tectone drama. Court cases are then used to smear his father. Let's see. Anyway, according to the court, while naming suspects involved, The assumption of relevant identification is not plausible. Vallendar justified his request by pointing to what he called a lack of transparency in crime data, obviously, particularly since the German government stopped separately recording suspects' migration backgrounds in 2022. So the government has been trying tooth and nail to stop information coming out on just how bad the situation is with their mass migration program. And in his view, this AfD member, the only remaining statistical clue to the origins of suspects lies in their first names.
Das Land Berlin hat heute die offizielle Kriminalstatistik für das Jahr 2024 vorgestellt. Insgesamt wurden 539.049 Straftaten erfasst. Im Vergleich zu 2023 ein Anstieg um 0,4%. Die Aufklärungsquote liegt wie im Vorjahr bei 45,5%. Der Anteil der nicht-deutschen Tatverdächtigen erhöht sich von 48,7 auf 50,9%. Betrachtet man allerdings alle Straftaten ohne ausländerrechtliche Verstöße, erhöht sich der Anteil der nicht-deutschen Tatverdächtigen von 43,2 auf 43,9%. Und darüber möchte ich sprechen mit.
It's bad. And these governments are trying everything they can to hide this from the public, from you, from me, from the German citizens. And it's also happening here. Same kind of crap. Not in the same way, but the same attempts to hide and obfuscate. Now, the Senate had previously argued that releasing such data could result in social stigmatization and misinterpretation. Shut the up. Social stigmatization. I mean, come on, man. If you have a group of people who are causing a lot of crimes, you can't keep saying mostly peaceful, like we did here with the hate groups BLM and Antifa. People are eventually going to see through your lie. And the more you try to obfuscate and hide from your citizens what you're doing, the worse the fallout and the backlash will be when the lie finally breaks. Now, the Senate cited the risk of names being used to construct social hierarchies or fuel-based narratives or biased narratives, particularly given the current public focus on knife-related violence, because it's a problem in your country. Breaking. This is the next post. Germany's worst kept secret is out, straight from the horse's mouth. This year, we have to talk about non-German suspects. Wow. Who admits, the Interior Ministry, Nancy Faeser, who admits that foreigners are significantly disproportionately represented in the country's crime. No duh. A lot of these people have come from countries where violence is the norm. It is difficult to go from a violent society where life is cheap to a Western democracy where life, generally speaking, is much more sacred. Which is why you need to bring them in smaller numbers so that you don't overwhelm the system and you can help them assimilate. If you don't do that, the problem will escalate. And eventually, if enough of them congregate together, you might find yourself in a situation where you end up with a national coup on your hands. And Germany is finding this out the hard way. They FA'd and they are now FOing. They on and they're finding out. Now, Berlin's Interior Administration maintained that the release of first names would contribute little to an informed debate and could instead lead to misleading assumptions. Still, the court found that the public interest in transparency outweighed the Senate's concerns. Yet no people want to know the truth because they're being lied to by the government. And look, the more you lie to your public, to your citizens in a way that they know that you're lying to, because the government is always lying about something, but the more obvious you are about the lie, the more you break down the trust that your citizens have in your government, and that will eventually lead to a political collapse, and possibly worse. Better to be as upfront and honest as you can as possible if you want to keep your country going. Now, the ruling is seen as a significant victory for the AfD, which has long criticized what it calls political censorship and a lack of openness in crime statistics. And let me tell you something. I did a story back 6 months, maybe a year ago. There was a politician, Marie-Therese Kaiser, a German politician for the AfD, was convicted of a crime for posting public gang rape stats of Afghan migrants because they were disproportionately high, has been a problem in their country, and they convicted her for posting government data. So in Germany, a young female, this was a crazy story. She ended up seeing my report on it, and so I pinned her comment on there. But they have been lying and doing everything they can to hide this data from the public. Germany is in real trouble right now. And so, yeah, the AfD would definitely want to be, the AfD would be wanting to open this up. And the problem is that the more that they try to censor the truth coming out, the more radical the reaction is going to be in response. They're digging their own graves here, I think. Now, many Middle Eastern and North African-born migrants, now with German citizenship, are classified as Germans. They're doing this to hide their criminal numbers in the country's federal crime stats, thus diluting the devastating impact of mass migration or immigration has had on soaring crime. Berlin, as one of the more multicultural areas of the country, has been significantly affected. Just look at this violent crime in Germany. Has hit a record high. And now more and more Germans are afraid to leave their homes. 55% believe that the police have lost control of public spaces. You're seeing this in France. You're seeing this in parts of the UK. You would think that anyone with a brain running these governments would understand that this is not sustainable. But the European Union keeps on force-feeding their bloc countries into accepting more and more and more of these people. I mean, what the f*** are they doing? Why would you do this? You're committing cultural suicide. It just seems so stupid to me. Now, overall, non-Germans accounted for 39% of all crimes last year, but foreign-born naturalized citizens are not included in this percentage, so it's actually higher. A discrepancy that the AfD believes hides the true cost of mass immigration. The AfD state parliamentary spokesman in Berlin, Dr. Kristen Brinker, took to X to comment on the ruling, saying, "The fact that Marc Vallendar had to sue before the Constitutional Court gives a deep insight. Hopefully, the Senate of Berlin will come to its senses and finally provide the requested information on the first names of knife perpetrators." The fact that the Senate, led by Kai Wegner, of all people, does not want to give the first names is particularly remarkable. After all, it was Wegner himself who was able to win the 2023 election campaign by asking the first names of the New Year's Eve riot perpetrators. Remember earlier we talked about the mass gang rapes. Wegner didn't get an answer at the time either and left the whole thing at that after his election. So in other words, as soon as he got into power, he just said, well, we're moving on. Don't care about my own citizens. Bunch of if you ask me.